Welcome all of you for my new tutorial. Today I'm gonna show you how I built one of those billboards. It's mostly built from plastic card and plastic profiles by the company Evergreen Scale Models. And I've added some small details. And why I like it so much more than the MDF billboards you can buy, it's because it's super thin. MDF are minimum 3 millimeters thick. And if you think about it, you would never have such a thick billboard out there. I already had this Fallout themed billboard, but now I wanted to do a more New Vegas style. And with the Gamora, you can't be more New Vegas than that. First of all, you have to search the internet or any Facebook groups for the advertisement sign that you like. I went for the holster your weapon at Gamora. I copied it into PowerPoint and scaled it to 14.6 centimeters wide. Then I created 4 boxes on the sides and 5 boxes up and down. They are the same size. The boxes divide our picture into 5 or 4 equal sized squares. After printing, it looks like this. We need our ruler, our pencil, and our knife. Around our billboard, we now have these squares at the top and on the sides. Turn the page around, and you should see the lines that we've printed around our billboard. Use your ruler and your pencil and mark those areas around our billboard from top to bottom and from left to right until you have all those squares. Make sure that you don't see any of those squares on the front part. Then decide on which part of your billboard you want to have some parts hanging down, like the original glue wouldn't hold them off any longer. Use your knife and cut along one of those edges and along the other from the same square. Then push it a bit inwards so that when you're looking from the front, it looks like this part of your billboard would hang down, like the glue would have gone off. Do this on as many parts on your billboard as you like. I also cutted some lines from the sides or from the top and then cut it out along the edges using your hobby knife and, of course, your ruler. Where we have made those cuts from the sides, now go and turn the angles around so that it looks like it would be hanging down. You can also do the same thing with the corners themselves. When you finish doing that, you can also take your hobby knife and scrape some parts of the paper to create more damage. As I want this advertising sign to look more like it would have survived the apocalypse, I go in and rip some of the corners off. In the bottom right, I ripped a big part off and kept that for later. Best peel off one part at a time so that you have more control about how much damage you want to be represented here. You can do that on many corners as you like. Well, I went full in and ripped off at 3 of the 4 corners. When you're happy with your results so far, I thought, okay, why not do this in the middle and where I made the cut in the beginning, and started to rip some more off. But be careful, I wanted the slogan, your weapon, to be seen. So make sure that you don't rip too much off here. Now on to building the billboard itself. I'll use a 1 mm thick styrene sheet from Evergreen Models, and I did it 15 centimeters by 7.7 millimeters, so it's 2 millimeters above, below, and on each side of the advertisement sign itself. Just cut with your knife twice and then break it off. Use your hobby knife to clear the edges all around this billboard itself. Then we go to the polystyrene 226 from Evergreen Scale Model. Decide the height that your billboard is going to be. I cut the tubes at 12.5 centimeters. You need 3 of those tubes and best use some sanding paper to clear the edges of the tubes. Do that on all 3 of the tubes and on both of the sides. So when you've done doing that, let's check if they're all the same height. Well, that's good enough for me. Now onto the plastic glue. Apply it on the top, let's say around about 4 centimeters. Search for the middle. I'll use this cutting mat to get a nice and pretty 90-degree angle precisely at the middle. Then go for the second tube. I'll also apply some of the plastic glue and let's say 5 centimeters besides the middle tube. Then put it upwards straight and let's check if they're all the same height. Then we'll go back to the 1 millimeter styrene sheet and mark off 3 parts. The first is 3 centimeter wide because we have 3 centimeter bases, 1 centimeter and half a centimeter. They should be, let's say, 2 centimeters shorter than your billboard is. Also cut it out, break it apart until you have those 3 parts ready. Also clear all those edges so that you don't cut yourself, and it will look much better doing this. Next we're going for some I-beams. Also from Evergreen, it's the 276. Decide at which angle these will be, but remember, the bigger the angle, the bigger your base must be. I decided for around about this, and also using my cutting mat to help me with the right angles. You need 3 of those pieces. It's easiest if you have the first one ready to take the second half, put it together because one side already has the perfect degrees, and then cut the second part. At the end, we need 3 exactly the same pieces here. If we would glue the I-beams now on, then the contact surface would be too small. So we cut some millimeters from the top and bottom part of the eye so that the broad middle part has contact with the tube itself. So we have a bigger contact surface and more stability later. Do this on all 3 of the I-beams. Before gluing it all together, we need the 276 I-beams also from Evergreen Scale Models. Cut 3 parts, each 3.5 centimeters long, and similar to the other I-beams, we cut some millimeters out so that later we have a good contact surface. Cut a half circle round about 0.5 centimeters from the side so that they now fit good at the side of the tubes. Add some plastic glue and round about 0.5 centimeters from the bottom of the billboard itself, glue them onto the tubes. We're looking for a 90-degree angle here, and they should have the same distance from the bottom of the billboard or advertisement sign itself. Add some plastic glue on top of the I-beams and take your 3 centimeter wide styrene sheet that we have already prepared. Look that it's centered and round about 4 millimeters from the billboard itself, so that there is some air between the billboard. If you look from above, make sure that it all fits nicely and that the 90-degree angle is still in shape, because otherwise any miniature could fall down. Then grab one of your paints and add some plastic glue here under the tubes so that we now can glue this crossbar down here. Glue it on and make sure that on one side it's just around about 2 millimeters from the side. If it's dry, then we just cut off at the same distance the other side of this crossbar. Then clean this new edge with your knife. Now we need a base from 1 millimeter styrene sheet. It should be as broad as the advertisement sign itself. Put some plastic glue under each of the 3 tubes and then put it on the base and use some container so that when it's dry you have a perfect 90-degree angle. Then check if there's enough space for your I-beams on the base, then glue them on. After that, we glue the second, the 0.5 centimeters crossbar at the back, round about the same height. Again, make sure that one side is round about 2 millimeters overlapping, and then when it's dry, use your cutter and then your knife to reduce the other side to the same 2 millimeter length and clean the edge. After that is done, we begin with decorating the base. It's totally up to you what you do. I'm just showing you what I've done. First, I get some small stones and make a circle of wood glue here. Then place the small stones as a circle. It will later look like a small campfire. I used some wood stick to make the circle look good. Then fill the inside with some sand and it's time for Aggregate Earth. Put some spots on your base, as big and as many as you like. I decided to go for 2 smaller and 1 bigger spot. You don't need to ruin any brush here, just use a wooden stick and apply it to your base. When this color dries, it will get some really cool looking cracks. I decided to also add, using some wood glue, some small stones. One is placed directly beside the campfire, where some guy could be sitting, and the other 2 are placed just randomly over my base. When all this is completely dry, I spray paint it with Army Painter's Desert Yellow. After spray painting, it looks like this, bit yellowish, but exactly what we're going for. Now onto the first contrast paint, snakebite leather and a big brush. A destroyed tip is totally fine, just make downward movements, adding in some water so that the paint isn't too dark. You have to do that on all the wooden parts. Remember to use your brush always in the same direction. In the end, after all the layers that we're going to paint, it will give it a wood-like structure. Some areas are brighter, some areas are darker, and it's totally fine, and we really want this as a goal, those striping look. As the goal is also to achieve a look of some dirt and grime washing downwards, in this first layer we don't have to paint downwards to the bottom of each part. It's totally fine if you do it like I do here. When you're done with the last wooden bit, start at the beginning with the first thing. And again, I apply another layer with the same color snakebite leather. Also, we're looking for some darker, some lighter areas before we go to contrast wildwood as the next color. Also, we're going for an old brush with a destroyed tip. Get some paint on your brush and paint on also only the wooden parts. And we're going also for that stripe look, as we did with the first 2 layers. Only paint in some areas. The big flat white surfaces from the start now begin to look attractive and interesting. The next darker contrast paint, Sugar Brown. Same brush, same thing. Don't forget to work with some water, otherwise it would be too dark what you're doing here. Don't leave any of those wooden areas, and just some areas each, so we get some even more interesting looking structures here. When we're done with all the contrast paints, we go for a regular paint, a brown Mornfang brown. And we paint all the metal areas in this color. There will be only rust, no metal colors today. That's what your piece should look like right now. And then we go for another color, Scrag brown. Use a mixture of tapping on and dry brushing. The metal parts are already beginning to look rusty, but it's still not enough right now. So let's take another color next, also rust, Riser rust. And the same brush. Dry brush a bit on over the metal parts, just like I'm doing here. Not too much, because otherwise it would look too orange and so too freshly rusted. While we're doing this, the wooden part should be really dry. So let's go back to contrast paint snakebite leather and paint the whole thing. Don't forget to use up and downwards movements and lots of water. Cover the whole wooden parts, just every bit. And then we go for Ushabti bone and paint the stones and the cracky areas on our base. Also, I paint the side of the base in this color, but you may also use whatever your color using. Then go back to Ushabti bone, if you should have used another one, and paint the paper parts that you're going to see from the front. We don't want those really bright white areas because our advertisement sign is a bit older, let's say 200 years and before the atomic war. So when you're done, put it aside and we go back to the contrast paint, adding it to all those areas on the base that we've just painted, the stones and the cracky areas. Now we're mixing wildwood and contrast medium in a 50-50 mix to create something like a shade or wash. And we use it on all the wooden parts that have some angles on them. Best place your sign on your table and then paint one side of each of the beams. Then, when dry, turn it around and paint the second side of your I-beams. If it should become too dark, mix some water in. Then use your mixture to apply it into the recesses between the tubes and the flat areas. While this is drying, we go back to our Ushabti bone and our base. Dry brush all the cracky areas and the stones that are on your base. Don't forget the small stone circle. Like all of my other terrain pieces, I want also this billboard to look dusty, so I dry brush the top edges and also a bit the side edges with Ushabti bone to give it the look of dust that has settled from the desert on top of it. Now you've got some work to do because you have to dry brush all the wooden parts, not only the top part. The rim of this, for example, and also the small wooden beams that you can see here. Don't forget them, dry brush them from the top. Next, mix in some ceramide white. And with this mixture, dry brush the stones and the cracky areas on the base. Then we take Abaddon black to paint the inner part of our stone circle so that it will look like an old campfire. Dry brush it with ashen gray also. Don't forget that the inner sides of the small stone circle also has to be dry brushed. Then use a bigger brush and dry brush all the bottom parts. The I-beams, the tubes, and also your wooden structures. Don't forget the bottom part of the billboard itself, where the advertisement sign will be glued later. We'll stay with the ashen gray and dry brush the Ushabti bone parts of our advertisement. Then dry brush the top parts with Ushabti bone, so it will also get that dusty, dirty look like the wooden part itself. Mix your PVA glue with some water and apply it onto the back part of your advertisement. Then put it on the billboard itself and try to get it into the real position as long as the glue is still wet. When there are some parts where there isn't enough glue, just add some more of your mixture and press the paper onto the plastic. And also apply some of the mixture on the hanging parts of your paper to give it more stability. Then we go for the unthinned PVA glue and apply it on the back parts of the hanging paper parts and glue them onto the rest of the advertisement sign so that you don't have any hanging parts. When playing your games, you don't want any of the paper to be ripped off. You want to place some miniatures up here, like a sniper or something like that, and you don't want to damage your terrain doing that. For an even more interesting look, we'll glue some cactuses onto the base. If you're interested in them, I have a tutorial link in my description. Use super glue to put them on your base. I decided to go for 3 cactuses in different sizes and shapes. It starts to look like a cool terrain piece right now, doesn't it? I'll add some satin flock to the base, just like on the other videos. We want to build the campfire now and take a toothpick for that. Cut some like 3, 4 or 5 parts of your toothpick, each round about half a centimeter long, and then cut them into quarters. Then we're going to paint them all in basilicanum gray. When dried, one of the most tricky parts begins. You will need your wood glue, like I use here, and also some tweezers to place all those small pieces when you've applied some glue into the small stone ring and build some kind of pyramid. When all of those small parts are glued in place, we go for our glue mixture that we have already and apply some of it over this pile. Use enough glue mixture and then use some kitchen paper to soak off all the water. I recommend using old fantasy skeleton next, and if you want it totally fancy, I green studded a small sleeping bag to go beside the campfire. And I've printed some small garden gnomes. I've painted one of them and also the skeleton in its sleeping bag. To paint the skeleton, I used white and gray colors, no bone colors here, to give it more contrast from the surrounding sand. Now the advertisement itself still looks a little bit too good, so go for some contrast snakebite leather and first paint all those parts that are still white. Add some water so that it won't become too dark here. And now we're going to paint with it some dirt and grime streaks. Search for the areas where you think water would be flowing and add the color there. After the brown, we add some military shader from Army Painter and add some green strikes also. Same thing as before, add as many of those grime streaks as you like. You will see it best on the white letters and also on the lighter parts of your billboard. On the darker parts, you won't see much of it. You could also use some other colors to get even more color variation in your weathering. What I will be doing next is add some pigments with the pens from AK Interactive. The first is streaking dirt. It needs some water to function, and I like to use an older brush, apply the water directly onto the tip of the pen, and then, similar to a normal color, apply it with your brush. This way I have more control over the weathering effect. Add as many weathering effects as you like until you're happy with your result. And then I was using a more browner colored pen to add some darker pigments also to our weathering here on the billboard. Personally, I like my weathering to be a bit subtle, so I only used not too much color on each of my steps. You may, as you like, use much more. And as a finishing touch, with the glue mixture, I glued here the one corner of the advertisement to make it look like it would have landed here. It adds to the realism. Thank you all for watching. and have fun building your own billboards.